Universities pay for LGBTQ plus inclusive rankings to make money as they raise tuition. The University of Houston pays $30,000 in a free speech lawsuit, a win for the First Amendment, and George Washington University dumps their Colonials nickname and mascot due to it being discriminatory and offensive. We will be discussing these three stories, the details on them, and more. I'm Emily Sturge, and you're watching Campus Countdown. In our third story this week, universities pay for LGBTQ plus inclusive rankings to make money as they also raise tuition. Campus Pride Index, known as CPI, is the benchmark tool for LGBTQ plus students to determine which colleges are going to be the most inclusive and LGBTQ friendly. CPI ranks universities on a 1 to 5 star scale, with 5 indicating the most LGBTQ plus inclusive campuses. But colleges and universities pay to be ranked and can expect revenue as a result of high ratings. CPI Executive Director Shane Windmeyer explained the campus reform, quote, "Campuses, in order to survive, they're businesses," he said. So regardless of the education, at the end of the day, a college campus is a business, and the way that they make money is by recruiting students and retaining students. Campus Reform analyzed several universities that CPI gave 5-star ratings to last month and found that several 5-star institutions who have spent money on LGBTQ plus inclusivity projects are coincidentally raising tuition for the 2022 school year. One example comes from Ohio State University, where they continue to spend money on LGBTQ plus initiatives, including workshops on safe zone training and creating LGBTQ plus inclusive classrooms. The money for these programs has to come from somewhere, so unfortunately for students, OSU is increasing tuition by 4.6%. The cost of college has skyrocketed over the last few years, posing a crushing burden for families and working students. And yet, we're seeing colleges and universities spend money on programs like these that do little to prepare students for successful careers in the real world. These colleges would better serve students by curbing this wasteful spending, cutting tuition costs, and providing resources for students to help them with their careers in the real world.
The University of Houston settled a lawsuit brought by the nonprofit organization Speech First that accused the university's harassment policy of being unconstitutional due to its overbroad interpretation. "This is a huge win for the First Amendment," said Speech First Executive Director Charisse Trump in a press release. "It sends a message to the University of Houston and other universities that they will be held accountable if they enact unconstitutional policies on campus." The University of Houston will pay $30,000 to Speech First in fees and eliminate their harassment policy. The university has set in place a revised policy and tightened their definition of harassment. The new definition reads, "Severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive treatment that denies a student equal access to education. A minor verbal and nonverbal slight, snub, annoyance, insult, or isolated incident, including but not limited to a microaggression, is not sufficient to establish discrimination or harassment," the policy defines. According to Speech First Trump, the settlement should serve as a warning to other universities with overbroad speech codes that their policies will not be tolerated. Campuses are supposed to be places of intellectual diversity where students exchange ideas and hone critical thinking skills. This cannot happen when thoughts and ideas are suppressed and banned. Stifling free speech causes our campuses to become environments of bias, indoctrination, and intellectual bullying. Back to you, Emily.
In our number one story this week, George Washington University has officially dropped their Colonials nickname and mascot. The university announced in a press release that their board of trustees has decided to retire the 92-year-old Colonials nickname and mascot due to it being deemed discriminatory and offensive. In response to students who said the Colonials nickname, quote, "glorified the legacy of international colonialism, slavery, and racial discrimination," the university created a special committee which ultimately decided to drop the nearly century-old moniker. the committee released a 31-page report which accused the name Colonials of having negative undertones associated with colonization. The report stated, Colonials means colonizers both here and abroad and refers to those who stole land from indigenous groups, plundered their resources, murdered and exiled native peoples, and introduced slavery into the colonies, end quote. George Washington University college Republicans have voiced their opposition to the university's decision, providing campus reform with the following statement. Quote, these colonials fought against foreign rule. They weren't advocates of the practice of colonialism. This makes me wonder, what's next? In 2020, Campus Reform reported on rioters at GWU who beheaded their George Washington statue. Is the next step for George Washington University to take our nation's first president out of their official name? I wouldn't be surprised. Will the university claim American history as too offensive for woke college students? And will other universities continue to follow this trend? We'll see. Now, it's time for the woke tweet of the week. Their International Swimming Federation, known as FINA, voted on a new ruling that prohibits male athletes to compete as women if they went through male puberty. In response to this ruling, this former D1 swimmer and coach took to Twitter to share her thoughts. Dr. Joanna Mellis tweeted the following, quote, what a horrific policy. I continue to be embarrassed and have been a former D1 swimmer and college coach. Our community seeks any reason to exclude people and discourage them from learning how to swim, leading to higher drowning rates. Ensuring that males who have gone through puberty are not allowed into the female category where they have a massive competitive advantage, this excludes no one. In May, the World Swimming Coaches Association advised FINA to consider opening their own open division to deter men from competing against women. According to the organization, transgender inclusion could not coexist with the current competitive model because it does not account for fair competition. That wraps up this week's edition of Campus Countdown. To read more about these stories and more, visit campusreform.org, and remember to like and subscribe here on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Campus Reform. I'm Emily Sturge, and this was this week's Campus Countdown.